Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be recapping Day 10 of the first round of the NHL playoffs. We are approaching the end of the first round, just 2 games today, and both games had their series concluded tonight. The first one up was Capitals versus Islanders. The Capitals had managed to extend it, not get swept, and move on to this all-deciding Game 5, and it starts off with, once again, the Islanders building up this lead for themselves. They get the first goal from Beauvillier, then the second goal from Beauvillier, and they're up 2-0. Would the Capitals be able to pull off the same thing they did in Game 4? It would not be in the cards tonight, as eventually the Islanders would get 2 empty netters from Leddy and Bailey, and that would be the end of the Capitals' season. And it's something that I mentioned earlier on and multiple times here for the Islanders. If they make mistakes, this team, they are sure to clean them up in the following game. It happened from Game 3 to Game 4 in the Panthers-Islanders series, and it again happens here in Games 4 to Game 5. It was a situation in which, yes, you commend the Capitals for being able to make that comeback back in Game 4, but you should know the Islanders are not going to give you that same opportunity if they once again get, let's say, a 2-goal lead like they did in this game. And yet the Capitals, they still don't come out swinging. They still look uninspired. They let the Islanders get this lead, and as I said, no mistakes this time. The Islanders close it out. Good news for the New York Islanders is, of course, this team is rolling. They've only lost 2 games of the 9 that they have played, which is obviously a very good record, and they're moving on pretty much unscathed, all things considered. The only bad news here for the Islanders is that they haven't really proven anything new for us that we didn't already know. So, for instance, the Islanders came into the playoffs last season, and they swept the Pittsburgh Penguins. It was insane. People were not really expecting that, even if the Islanders had been good that regular season, because it was the Penguins. You know, the Penguins are a great team. They had won 2 Stanley Cups so recently. But then the Islanders moved to the second round. They faced off against a Hurricanes team who played in a much different way from the Penguins and played in a much more similar way to the Islanders. And what happened? They got swept. Lost 4-0 to the Hurricanes. And so they come in this season, they play against a team like the Panthers, which are a team that rely on big skilled players like Barkov, like Huberdeau, and they win it in 4 games. They come up now against the Capitals, another skilled team that relies on players like Ovechkin and Kuznetsov. They win it in 5 games. This is no different from them sweeping the Penguins last season. And so, for instance, if in these playoffs they come up against a team like the Boston Bruins, who, by the way, was the team that swept the Hurricanes last season, and again beat them this season, and reminder, the Hurricanes beat the Islanders last season, can they actually prove that they can beat a team who plays in a similar way as they do? So it's pretty clear at this point, pretty established, that the Islanders against a skilled team match up very, very well. But the bad news is that we don't know if they're actually able to beat teams of their level, because last season it showed they couldn't really do it. In terms of the Capitals, you know, these past couple of seasons have been rough. Both have been first-round losses. Last one was at least extremely close against the Hurricanes. This one is going to sting a bit more, as it was a 5-game loss in which they didn't look particularly good for most of it, if we're being honest. However, of course, this sting is really softened by the fact that just a couple years ago they did still win the Stanley Cup. And so that definitely helps. If they hadn't won that cup, it still would have been just years of playoff disappointment for the Capitals. But because they have that, it's not necessarily a huge deal. I'm sure Caps fans will be sad, but in a couple of days we'll absolutely get over it. In terms of the future here for the Capitals, their championship window, I would say, is still pretty open. Holtby has fallen off as of late, but they've got Samsonov as this new young goaltender who seems to be very, very good. Players like Ovechkin and Backstrom still probably have a couple good years left in them. Ovechkin probably still a couple. So this Capitals team should still be competitive for the foreseeable future. Will we see them still, dominating the Eastern Conference during the regular season 5-6 years down the line? Maybe, maybe not. But for the foreseeable future, as I've said, this should still be a team that's a playoff team. And to the next series, this was Flames versus Stars. The Stars had the 3-2 lead. The Flames were going to look to tie it up and force a Game 7, but they end up losing 7-3. This game starts off very, very, very well for the Flames. They score the first 3 goals. Mangiapane, Goodrow, and then to get the next one is Rasmus Andersson, and they're up 3-0, and this isn't just a 3-0 lead in which it was a close game for the first few minutes, but the Flames got a couple of nice bounces. This was these first three goals came off of pure Flames dominance. It looked like the Stars were a peewee hockey team at the start of this game. That's how strong the Flames looked. And I was thinking, oh yes, I was right about the Flames being such an inconsistent team. Sometimes they'll show up and they'll just look terrible. Sometimes they'll show up and they'll look like one of the best teams in the NHL. And this was that moment where they were showing up and looking like the best team in the NHL. But within the same game, they completely flip that coin and just look awful. They give up the next 7 unanswered and lose the game. And let me just mention something here. They give up 1 to Heiskanen. Then they give up 2 to Gurianov, and the game is tied at 3. And what does Jeff Ward, the Flames coach, do in his infinite wisdom? He pulls Cam Talbot. That's right, Cam Talbot, who played every single minute of every single game here for the Flames through these playoffs, all 9 games up to this one, that being the 10th. He played every game, and he was very good throughout most of them. Maybe he wasn't Carey Price or Jonas Korpisalo level, but he was very good. He was almost certainly the best player for the Flames throughout these playoffs. He's been so strong, and yet after giving up these 3 goals, it's a tie game, and Jeff Ward pulls him and puts in David Riddick, who has not played a minute in these playoffs. And what happens? What a surprise. They give up another 3 goals, 3 even uglier goals than the first 3 they gave up, including this 6th one, which was from Gurianov after Faksa and Pavelski had made it 4-3 and 5-3 respectively. This 6th goal is one that any NHL goaltender should not be giving up in their entire career with how weak this was. And then what does Jeff Ward do? Again, in his infinite wisdom going into the 3rd period, he puts Talbot back in between the pipes. It's 6-3 now. You just pulled this goaltender, who you could very well say is the only reason why you were even at a point in Game 6. The only reason why you had 2 games in this series. You put him back in to embarrass himself further and lose this game 7-3. Jeff Ward has been solid in his replacement of Bill Peters throughout this regular season for the Flames. He sort of turned the season around for them, so he deserves credit for that, but this is absolutely the worst coaching decision I have ever seen, and in such an important game, Game 6 on the brink of elimination, this is absolutely a fireable offense. Just an awful choice by Jeff Ward. I can't even begin to imagine what was going through his head when he decided to actually pull Cam Talbot in this situation. Imagine if we were to watch the Montreal Canadiens tomorrow go up against the Flyers, give up 3 goals, and then Kirk Muller were to pull Carey Price. It wouldn't make any sense. He'd be run out of town for doing something like that. And for whatever reason, Jeff Ward thought, oh, well, this seems like a great play to do. Let me just turn around the momentum of this game. You don't do that with a goaltender who has been your best player and has played every single moment for you in these playoffs. If, for instance, in the game tomorrow, to use as another example, the St. Louis Blues decide to go with Jake Allen once more in this series, and he lets in 3 goals in this game, and they decide to pull for Jordan Binnington, that makes sense, because Binnington played the first 2 games of that series. Binnington played 2 of the 3 round robins in the round robin section, and so pulling Jake Allen for Jordan Binnington to reverse the momentum of the game is a perfectly fine play for Craig Berube. But doing it in this situation is honestly just unacceptable for any NHL coach, for any coach at any level, anywhere. It's just terrible for the Flames. But anyway, moving on, I should go. The good news for the Dallas Stars, their offense has been fantastic. While their top players haven't necessarily been super apparent in Ben, Radulov, and Seguin, which is their first line, players like Joe Pavelski, who of course we knew were very clutch playoff performers, have stepped up heavily. Gurianov has been surprisingly very strong for the Dallas Stars. And of course, Miro Heiskanen has probably been the Stars' best player for them. So a lot of players really stepping up. And if that top line for the Stars can, just bring it to another level, they could be a very dangerous team. They're going to be facing the Colorado Avalanche in the next round. The only bad news for the Stars, it has to be in between the pipes here. Khudobin, he's been solid, but he's been somewhat shaky. Of course, he gave up the first 3 goals of this game, and if Ben Bishop had actually been available, Khudobin would have almost certainly be pulled in that situation, and Ben Bishop would step in, but Ben Bishop is, of course, unfit to play. The Stars do not really have a third string who can replace Khudobin, so he ends up staying between the pipes, and honestly, he does redeem himself in this game by not letting in any more goals. However, it is still maybe a bit of a shaky issue, especially since they are going up against an Avalanche team who just potted 7 goals in a row against Darcy Kemper, who had looked so good. It can be a bit dangerous here, especially also to add on to that is because the Stars' defense, while their offense has been great, the Stars' defense has been shaky at times throughout this Flames series. In terms of the Calgary Flames, I don't really know what the future holds for them. On paper, this is still a very, very good team. It honestly sort of reminds me of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I had said the Maple Leafs were a very inconsistent team in game. The Flames are the exact same thing. Both of those teams very, very good on paper, and yet for whatever reason, continuously lose in these playoffs, continuously lose in the first rounds. The Flames did make it past the play-ins at the very least, but mostly because the Jets sort of gifted it to them by losing. I mean, it's not really their fault that the Jets lost these players, but losing Scheifele and Laine in the first round. The Flames move fast after the first one, but they lose here to the Stars. Even though this series was in 6 games, it really wasn't as close as it looked. A lot of these games, the Flames were outplayed, but managed to stay in part thanks sometimes to just opportunistic scoring, as well as Cam Talbot playing very, very good. And so we're moving forward here. The Flames, as I said, great on paper, but I don't know if you can actually afford to go into another regular season, another playoffs as this Flames team having changed nothing. Players like Goodrow, players like Monahan have been great in the regular season, but when it comes to the playoffs, they just really haven't shown up that much. I mean, Monahan and Goodrow were solid on the power play, but at even strength, mostly invisible for most of this series, most of this series. And so it's going to be a very interesting offseason. In the previous video, I had mentioned that the Arizona Coyotes were going to have an interesting offseason. I'm definitely going to have to keep a watchful eye on the Flames because something probably does have to change here for Calgary. But that will do it for this recap. Only 2 more series remain. In terms of predictions, I had said the Capitals would win in 7. Obviously, that was very far off. It's the Islanders who ended up getting the victory and in 5 games. And then I had said the Stars would win in 7. That came very close to happening, but the Flames only lasted 6 games, though I did get the Dallas winning correct. Class dismissed.